We give the person a Bible verse, we say a quick prayer, we slap them on the back and say, okay, now you're good. That's not what you do. But you sit with them, you recognize that pain, and you give them a safe place to tell their story without judgment, without reaction.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to begin that road to healing.
Hey, welcome back, everyone, to the Valor Vision Podcast. I'm super excited today because whenever I get to have any other military personnel on here with me, I'm all about it. I'm all about it. So today we have Dr. Larry Brant with us. And so he is a Navy chaplain, but let me get into his bio for you guys. Dr. Larry Brant. He's a doctor of ministry and board certified chaplain, has devoted his life to the care of souls in the church, on the battlefield, and in some of life's most difficult moments. A native of Illinois, Larry spent 25 years in pastoral ministry, serving churches across Kentucky, Virginia, Tennessee, Illinois, and Nebraska. Along the way, he also served as a volunteer police and fire chaplain in Lincoln, Nebraska. And I'm privileged to be a part of that crew, as well as being a police chaplain myself, and providing presence, comfort, and steady guidance in the aftermath of emergencies and crisis. In 2009, Larry stepped into a new season of calling as a United States Navy chaplain. Over the next decade, he ministered to sailors, Marines, and Coast Guard men, deploying 3 times, including a combat deployment to the Helmand province in Afghanistan. His military service reflects not only courage, but a deep, unwavering commitment to the spiritual and emotional well-being of those entrusted to his care. Larry holds multiple advanced degrees in ministry and theology, including a doctor in ministry, and is extensively trained through clinical pastoral education with the Department of War and the VA. He is also a certified trainer in suicide prevention, crisis care, and marital counseling. Now based in 29 Palms, California, Larry continues to write, teach, and equip others through his pastoral work and resources. He and his wife, Tammy, have been married 39 years. Congratulations. And together, they are proud parents, grandparents, and partners in life and in ministry. Welcome to the podcast, Larry.
Great to be here. Thanks, Nick.
So, we talked on the phone, and, I was just telling you about how last 2 days literally have been my refresh training and all that kind of good stuff for chaplain training and everything. And one of the things that I try to remind myself is that the titles, the roles, the jobs that we do are not who we are. Those are roles that we play. God has equipped us with capabilities, talents, and giftings, and all of those things that are our identity that make us great at those positions. And so tell us a little bit more about you. What was your upbringing? Who is Larry without all of the amazing degrees and chaplain titles and all that kind of good stuff?
Yeah, well, I was raised just outside of St. Louis, in Metro East area of Illinois. Grew up in church, grew up Southern Baptist. I was the kind of, how do I want to say this? I was the honey, sit down, I've got a surprise for you. My sister is 17 years older than me, but just had a great upbringing there in Southern Illinois, and then went to college, thought I was going to be a worship pastor for all of my life. Because I was actually, that 25 years in ministry, I was an associate pastor doing worship and youth, worship and discipleship, what have you. And I thought that's what I was going to be doing. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's in music. And so did all of that, married my college sweetheart. And, like you said, we've been married 39 years, 40 in June, together 3 years before that. She's put up with so much, and 3 grown children and 2 grandchildren. And that's who I be.
Man, I don't think it's anything short of a blessed life right there. So you went into college, though, wanting to be a worship pastor. I mean, clearly nobody just joins college to want to be a worship pastor without having a salvation moment. If you're raised in the church, we always say, though, also in the church, you're not born Christian.
Right.
It's a faith that God finds you accept all of this, in there. And so what was that like? Where did that happen? How did that happen for little Larry?
Well, my family was very active in our church. My dad was a trustee. My mom was a Sunday school teacher. So I grew up in the church. The phrase goes, I started attending 9 months before I was born. And honestly, when I was 7, I went to my mom and dad and I just said, from hearing all of the stories in Sunday school, I just said, tell me more what it means to be saved. And my mom and dad explained it in a way that a 7-year-old could understand. And at the end of that, I prayed to receive Christ. And then our pastor came over and talked with me and made sure I understood everything and just wasn't kind of going through some kind of motions. And then after that, I was baptized and started my spiritual journey in high school. I was very involved in missions, would go on 1 or 2 mission trips every summer as a part of the youth group. And we even had an associational youth group that did missions. So a lot of backyard vacation Bible schools and backyard Bible clubs and just going to various places for ministry and enjoying that. And that kind of led me into feeling called to be a worship pastor and associate pastor. And I thought that was going to be my life.
Mm.
And it's funny how, God can take our calling and then over time kind of evolve it.
Yeah, no, how God operates in each of our lives and how specific He operates in each of our lives is pretty amazing. So you kind of start out your chaplaincy, if I'm getting the story correct, with being a volunteer police and fire chaplain.
Hmm.
So where did that happen? Where did like, hey, we need this, jumping in. It's volunteer, so this is taking extra time with no pay. How did all of that jump in and really get you the balls rolling for all of that?
Well, not long after I came to my church in Lincoln, Nebraska, we had some police and firefighters in the congregation. And one day after church, they approached me and they said, hey, we think you've got the right temperament to be a volunteer chaplain for the city. Would you consider doing that? And I prayed about it and I felt like God was saying this. Go for it. So I went to my senior pastor and made sure he was good with it, and he was. So then I started down that road and started volunteering for the city. And over the course of time, ended up running the ministry for the city. We had about 25 volunteer chaplains from different faith groups, and we worked with the police and the fire departments there in Lincoln. We were called the Lincoln Chaplain Corps. And so having 25 people, then what happened was, with a few exceptions, most of us took 1 day a month. Some of us took more than one. And we were just on call for 24 hours in that period. And it was wonderful being able, as the senior chaplain, to be able to walk into the office of the mayor, the office of the police chief, the office of the fire chief, and just say, hey, how are you doing today? How can I best pray for you? How can I encourage you? And
Hmm.
have that freedom to do that. And then also doing that with the officers as well, and the firefighters, the first responders, and then being able to provide some measure of comfort to people, usually on their very worst day.
Yeah, yeah.
And just being able to provide some measure of comfort, in some cases, to be a liaison between a family and the police department, in some cases, escorting women to shelters, making sure that they and their children were safe, and just being able to provide that kind of crisis ministry was very rewarding.
I think just for our audience, a lot of people misconstrue what a chaplain is compared to a pastor.
Mhm.
They're very different hats. Of course, you still have your faith. That's not changing. But how you approach people, and definitely when you're dealing with police, fire, and then ultimately, police and the fire don't just operate by themselves, they operate with the public. And so you're dealing with people that of either different faith, little faith, potentially no faith.
Mhm.
Kind of like, hey, what's that big difference that people should understand about what a chaplain is compared to your pastor of a specific church or anything like that?
Well, the pastor, he is there to be a spiritual guide. He is there to evangelize.
Hmm.
That's their goal, is to evangelize from day one. Chaplains are there to provide spiritual guidance, to provide comfort. We don't just walk in the door trying to convert people, because things are so much more sensitive with being city sponsored or being county sponsored or nationally sponsored, we still are in our faith. We still want to talk about faith, but we have to do it in a different way. We can't really just kind of walk in the door and say, are you saved by the blood of Jesus today? Because for many people in the public, that's an immediate turnoff.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are there to provide comfort sometimes in their worst hour. And when a chaplain can do that, then usually people are more open to having that spiritual conversation later.
Yeah. Yeah. It's usually, the door opens when they initiate it,
Yeah.
when they're
And
wanting to
for a
say, hey,
military
teach
chaplain,
me more about this.
we live with our congregation literally when we deploy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. So, being that police and fire, I mean, I was listening to some statistics. Police officers probably go through 3 to 4 major traumatic experiences a month, and then times that by 12, and then times that by however many years that they're in. And
Right.
that's how many traumatic experiences these people are going through. And you're showing up on the scene at times when called to do these kinds of things. And of course, that has to have had profound impact on helping you jump into becoming a Navy chaplain, right?
It
And
really
how
did.
did that translate? Because I think a lot of times it's the reverse. Like for me, it's my military service. Then I'm going to be a police chaplain now, but this was in the other direction. Talk to us a little bit about that, and what made you go, "Hey, the Navy."
Well, yeah, it really helped me being a police chaplain first, really kind of helped me with that idea of institutional ministry and operating in a pluralistic environment, operating where, not everybody believes the same faith that I believe, and being able to navigate that, to have those spiritual conversations in the midst of that. That was a great help for me, and being able to work with people from other faith groups, the other chaplains, and in doing so, your focus is the welfare of the first responders and the welfare of the public. Not that a pastor's isn't, but you're focusing on how can we make this person's life better today,
Mhm,
sometimes in their worst hour. And when you're doing that, then shifting into the military, it's really not a lot different, because you're doing everything you can to make that military service member's life better today, and also their family as well. And it was interesting. So I was doing that voluntarily. I found out that my denomination was having a chaplain training in Hawaii, and it was the same week that my wife had off from school.
sign me up.
I went to her, I said, "Honey, it's of God that we go to this," and it wasn't really hard to convince her to go to Hawaii, you know.
It's in
Uh,
Hawaii.
and so we go to this training, and the vast majority, I think there were only 2 law enforcement chaplains there. Everybody else was military.
Mhm,
Because there's a lot of military presence that had come over from Japan, Korea, and of course we have a large military footprint on Hawaii itself. And as I'm visiting with these folks, God's beginning to work on me and saying, "Hey, you thought this was going to be training and vacation. Well, guess what? I'm calling you to military chaplaincy." And like Moses at the burning bush, I'm telling God all the reasons why he couldn't possibly correct about this. There's no way, God, and I thought I came up with 3 pretty good excuses. And then every excuse I came up with, it seemed like the very next session, that excuse got knocked down. First of all, at that time, this was 2007. So at that time, I was already too old to come into the military. The cutoff to be a chaplain is 42. I was already, older than that. And so I said, "God, I'm too old." Couldn't possibly happen. Next session, they're talking about how the Navy and the Army are short chaplains and that they're giving age waivers. Then I thought, well, I don't have the right degree. At that point in time, I had a Master of Church Music and a Master of Leadership. And I
mhm,
said, "God, I don't have the right degree. I don't have what they want." Now, understand this is 2007. So next session, they're talking about these newfangled things called online seminaries that are fully accredited that the military is accepting. And I was
mhm,
like, "Ugh, well, he's 2 for 2." And then I thought for sure I had him on this next one. And I said, "God, I'm a big boy And at that point in time, I weighed over 300 pounds. And God said, there's this thing called diet and exercise. So I said, okay, God, I'll go down this road if this is what you want. And then I said, but I really would like it if you could tell my wife, because I'm terrified to do that. Not that my wife is some kind of ogre. It's just that, she was working in the school system as a sign language interpreter, where, our kids were in high school. We were going and blowing, things were going well. And here I wanted to just rock this boat and run off and join the Navy. Matter of fact, that's what she tells people these days is she'll say, oh, we're living Larry's midlife crisis. We couldn't afford a convertible. He didn't want to be trained by a new wife. So he asked for my permission to run off and join the Navy. And I said, sure. That's what she tells people. Uh, so we're going back to the hotel room that night, and I feel like I'm just taking the long walk to the gallows because, I'm just going to rock this poor woman's world. And we get to the room and I close the door, and she turns around, puts her finger in my face and said, I think God's calling you to military chaplaincy. And I was like, he really did tell her. We're shocked when we pray for things and God answers them. We're like, whoa. And so then we stayed up a good portion of that night just talking about all of the changes that this was going to make. I'd have to go back to school online, and I'd have to lose a lot of weight, still work full time in ministry, still volunteer with the city because I didn't want to back off from that. Maybe not take as vital of a role, but still be involved. And I remember her saying very, very clearly, if this is what God is calling us to do, how can we do anything else?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so over the next year and a half, some of my other two master's degrees transferred into the Master of Divinity. And then over the next year and a half, I got my Master of Divinity. I lost 110 pounds. She bought me hours with a personal trainer, or as I like to say, she paid a 22-year-old to try to kill me. At least it felt that way at the beginning. And I was 110 pounds lighter a year and a half later. And then I got my Master of Divinity in May. And in August, I was on my way to Officer Development School in Newport, Rhode Island. And then a little over a year later, I found myself with a Marine Infantry Battalion in Helmand Province, Afghanistan.
Yeah, it's there was this fun we talked about some stuff. I was at church last night and we had our midweek service, and it's more like a Bible study and discipleship program that we were doing. And our preaching pastor was kind of talking and said, "Man, what is one of those moments where God comes in and uses a wild time in your life to just flip your life upside down?" And one of my Marine friends next to me sitting there, and we just kind of like looked at each other and laughed, and they're like, "We call those recruiters." And that's what happened to you. It's what happened to everybody. It's like the recruiter got us. They're the hands of God that will change your life for bring you into the service. So, and that's I think that, the details may be different for everybody, but the story is roughly the same for all of us that have served
Definitely.
in so many different capacities and MOSs and branches and all of that. But it starts with that recruiter and that little bit of, and then whether you believe it or not, God puts his hand in there, and it's all history from there.
There was a few times, where the weight had stalled and I had gotten frustrated, or I was in a hard class that was just, crushing me. And I was just so tempted to give up. And my wife would say, did God call you to this or not? Well, yeah, he did. Now turn around and get back out there. Yes, ma'am. No, in all point in fact, she is my number one encourager.
No, yeah, I don't think that it's hard to come up with words for the reality of a good wife.
Very true.
It really is, and so, that's hopefully your wife watches this as well. Good job, and my own wife and all of that, and yeah, they put up with a lot, they go through a lot, they encourage us through a lot,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
yeah, there's
She hates it when I say this, but I'll say she's a good wife. She's overcome the urge to smother me in my sleep for the last 39 years. So She's great.
Man,
And I've given her cause, let me tell you.
I think we all have. It's part of the male DNA, I
Mhm.
think. So you said you joined the Navy and then you're thinking, I'm gonna be on a ship, I'm gonna do all this, and they're like, "You're with a Marine infantry unit," and you're like, "Wait a minute,
Yeah,
that's probably a little different." Or was that something that you were like, "I want that, like, I chose that?"
I was terrified of it. I was
No.
actually terrified of it.
Okay, first premise was right.
I was getting ready to come in, had signed all the paperwork, but hadn't come to ODS yet. And I call, the detailer calls me because in the Navy, the person who assigns you to your billets is called the detailer because he details your orders.
Mhm.
And so the detailer calls me and he's got this big Southern drawl. And it's funny because we're the same age and he's calling me boy. And, because I joined the Navy at 45.
Mhm.
And he goes, boy, I'm going to send you to the Marine Corps. And he goes, East Coast, West Coast, pray about it. Call me back tomorrow. And I was just like, you know,
Mhm.
and so I talked to my endorser who was a retired Navy chaplain at the time. And I said, what do you think I should do? And he said, I would go with East Coast. He said, Camp Lejeune. I don't know if this is really accurate anymore, but at that time he said Camp Lejeune has a little bit more of a family friendly atmosphere. I think both bases really do. It's just one's in Southern California. So I said, well, I'll go with North Carolina. And he said, okay. And I was talking to, I had gotten to know people I was going to be going to ODS with and had gone to the care board with. And I was hearing all of these various choices that they were given all over the world. My wife and I were thinking we're going to live in Japan. We're going to live in Germany. We're going to go somewhere overseas. And here we were going to North Carolina, and that was not the foreign ministry I was expecting to go to. And I asked him, I said, with all of this stuff going, why am I going to North Carolina? And he laughed and he goes, boy, you're 45. If I send you to the Marines any older, they'll kill you. So I'm going to send you to them now. And so I went to the Marine Corps with much fear and trepidation and absolutely loved it.
Mhm.
The Marines are very special. I've enjoyed every billet I've had, but that first one with the Marines, being a part of 2nd Marine Division, and there I was a part of 3 different battalions over the 2.5 years that I was with them, and I was with tracks or AAVs, those vehicles that drive off the end of Navy ships that have
Mhm.
infantry inside, and then they're armored. They storm the beach, the door comes down, and they come out. I was with them for a little bit, and then I was with the infantry battalion for almost a year and a half and did the combat deployment with them, and then I finished up with the tanks, which the Marines don't have anymore, but they had tanks back then, and which was pretty cool because they would go to their range and they would say, "Chaps, we're going to the range. Would you like to?" And I just said, "Just assume the answer is yes." Because if they had some leftover rounds, they'd let me practice. So I did get to shoot the main gun a few times, and let me tell you, that's a rush. Uh,
Mhm.
but it was a wonderful experience, and I still talk to friends from that deployment to this day.
Yeah, no, that's I still do too from my first one. We were surrounded by Marines all over because we were in the middle of Al Anbar province
Okay,
in Iraq, and it was all held up by I think it was 2nd Marine Division. I think it was. I'm trying to remember which one primarily held it. We worked with them. And look, and I think a lot of people will hear all of the jokes that, we say in between different services, right? And Marines love to pick on the Army and the Navy, and we just call the Marines, hey, you guys, you're Department of the Navy, and that just makes them so mad. you know, crayon guys, and all the jokes. Ultimately, it's one of those kind of mentalities. I always look at it as it's in the family. We can pick on each other inside the family, but anybody outside starts trying to mess, it's like, "Hey, no, 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 you stop. You
exactly
don't
right.
touch my family." Like, at the end of the day, we all fought together, and it's
Yeah,
all one team, and it's for one nation. Yeah, and and there's something deeply spiritual about that, when you're fighting together, when you're going through, uh, situations that 99% of people would never dream or even volunteer to do,
mhm.
that you're doing with them. There's something spiritual behind it all that's deeply profound, and I think the same is for our police officers that do the same thing together, firefighters as well, any of our service industries in our communities as well, EMTs. A good friend of mine is both the fire chief and the EMS chief of Sea Isle out here in New Jersey, and it's the same thing. They go through a lot together, and so there's something spiritual about it, and so there's something deeply needed for chaplains to be a part of all of these because they're going through not just mental and physical trauma, but it's spiritual as well. And I kind of want to shift focus towards your book. It's a new book that came out and like when we first talked, it was like, hey, this is about to come out. How do I get on the wait list? I want to see this. And you're like, no, it's out already. And so it came out very recent. And it's already, I mean, look, it came out like literally weeks ago, and it's already got a number one on Amazon.com bestseller in different categories and everything. So congratulations on that, of
Thank you.
course.
Yeah,
I
I
haven't
was
gotten to read all of it, but thumbing through this is really cool. I brought this. I was telling you earlier. I brought this to my police refresh chaplain training yesterday and talked to them about what some of the work you're doing in here that a lot of people don't know about, right? And that's, I really want to start focusing on that kind of stuff on here and what's really profound about this book because we military, and fire and police, and then just in general public, all have heard of PTSD.
mhm.
It's very prevalent. World War II, Vietnam is probably called shell shock and all that kind of stuff, putting kind of weird military names onto it. But ultimately, it's the experience of trauma. But you have another term called moral injury. Talk to us about that, and really like the book kind of covering a lot of that.
Yeah, well, the term moral injury was really coined in 1994 by psychiatrist Jonathan Shea in a book that he wrote called Achilles in Vietnam. So, as he was working with Vietnam veterans at the VA, he was noticing that they had something that was different than PTSD.
Hmm.
Most people can kind of give you a halfway decent definition of PTSD. PTSD is that trauma, that fear, and that trauma that happens to us
Hmm.
from circumstances and traumatic events that just really kind of breaks us emotionally. But moral injury is different. Now, a lot of times moral injury can occur alongside PTSD. So PTSD is that fear-based trauma. Well, moral injury is kind of the evil twin to PTSD. Moral injury is when we do something, sometimes under the direct orders of someone in authority over us, or sometimes we may fail to prevent something, and the result of which just goes against everything that we believe morally, ethically, and most importantly, spiritually, to the point that we just get consumed by guilt and shame and feel like our soul has been corrupted. And as one person put it, my soul is just feels like it's in shards. It's broken in shards. And I don't feel like I can ever put that back together. They will just pull back from everything. They'll pull back from their faith. They'll pull back from their family. They'll pull back from their friends because they believe that they're no longer lovable. They believe they're no longer forgivable. They also may believe that they are so corrupted by what they've done that if they don't pull back from others, they'll actually corrupt their friends and their family.
Yeah, just seeing themselves as a danger, and they're
Yeah.
trying to do the heroic thing by keeping danger away. And if I'm that danger, then I'm going to keep myself away. Which ultimately, I think all of us in more of a faith based, perspective, that's believing the lie. And there may
That's
be shards of truth to it. You've gone through some stuff, you may be triggered, you may have some lashing out. I don't want to dismiss that there are some people that have some real issues. I remember working with the VA in some mental health areas while I was in college. I was doing a counseling course and we had to do so many hours, and I chose to go sit with a VA counselor and dealing with a lot of veterans and PTSD. And some of them would just say, and they were Vietnam veterans, most of them at this time, and some of them would say, yeah, I'm surprised my wife is still with me because there's a couple times I had a knife to her throat because she snuck up behind me and
mhm.
immediately reacted as if I was back in the jungle of Vietnam
Mhm.
and just pulled the knife out. And, he did of course, face recognition, never really did anything but freaks her out, of course, and all of that. And so I can see where those instances make them think that automatically I'm a danger to everybody. I need to stay away.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And dealing with those folks, and I think, as we talked about in VA circles, military circles, especially in mental health or chaplaincy, moral injury is known. But really, you go outside of those circles and into the general public or the church even, and very little is known about moral injury, and quite often
Mhm.
it gets mistaken for something else.
Yeah, I think that just a lot of people just want to easily box things up into PTSD, and it's all PTSD, right?
Yeah, it's all PTSD, it's burnout, it's
Mhm.
backsliding, it's lack of commitment, all of those things when, um, if they knew to look a little deeper, they would see it's something else.
Yeah. I really like your description of that this is more something that you did that you're feeling this way about versus something done to you.
Mhm.
I just was thinking about this, so it's maybe a kind of a hard question, but a lot of guys deal with survivor's guilt though. Where would you put that? Is that something done to you, or is this could be moral injury? Is that maybe even a situational based kind of thing?
Survivor's guilt can be moral injury because remember, they chose to survive and they feel guilty and ashamed of that. And so then you begin to work with them. First of all, sit and you recognize their pain. Don't deny that pain. I think that's what happens with us a lot in the church is we give the person a Bible verse, which is always a good thing. I don't want to say it's not. We give the person a Bible verse, we say quick prayer, we slap them on the back and say, okay, now you're good. That's not what you do. But you sit with them, you recognize that pain, and you give them a safe place to tell their story without judgment, without reaction.
Hmm.
That's going to begin that road to healing. And
Yeah.
that and then connecting them to the point where they feel like, yes, God can love me. God can forgive me. But survivor's guilt, I think, can fall into moral injury.
Do you see some areas where moral injury, the way to treat it, work with them through counseling and things is in a way a different message than PTSD and being able to handle it?
Yeah, because you think about PTSD is that fear-based trauma, whereas moral injury is that decision-based trauma. And so you begin to work with them on there are some things you do similarly there, but there are other things that you differently. And with moral injury, you're going to really examine why did I, try to find meaning in those actions, helping them to understand that maybe what happened here was you were thrown into a situation where you had a choice between what's bad and what's worse. You were in a situation where you had no good decision. For the gunner on a Humvee or on a 7-ton who had to fire into a vehicle-borne IED,
Mhm.
the decision was, do I shoot one person or do I allow everybody in my convoy to die? And so there is no good decision there. And then, you have to shoot that individual driving the truck, someone made in the image of God. You have to kill them. And then you get back, everybody slapping you on the back, and you feel like you're a terrible person because you did that. Or I have been told on more than one occasion, that very same gunner, as he begins to look at the driver of that vehicle-borne IED, as he gets ready to take the shot, the driver holds up a toddler.
Mhm. Yeah, and they've done that.
And it's, you know, do I shoot through the toddler to kill the driver? Because if that VBIED hits my convoy, that toddler's dead anyway. Um, and then I had one Marine who was faced with that decision. Everybody, when they got back, slapped him on the back, said, "You're a great guy." And in his head, he's thinking, "I'm a child killer. I'm a child
Yeah.
killer."
Yeah.
And then when he came home, as he was hugging his children, when he came home, all he saw was that toddler's face.
Yeah, that's those are rough ones that,
And
That's what
so,
our veterans face, and situations are very real with, when sometimes in the battle, kids get in the mix, or they've learned from their parents because their parents are part of the fighting. And the other one is where, the kid goes over to the dad that may have just got shot because he was shooting at the soldiers and right in the midst of firing, eliminate the threat, but then the kid picks up the gun, wants to start shooting too. And then what do you do? And then that's where guys take him out, but that has taken that person out
yeah.
for
So
mentally a lot.
then you have the decision, do I do something bad or do I do something worse?
Yeah. And this isn't just military, I'm sure like a lot of this is also police. Police deal with this on a daily basis of that moral decision making that many of us we don't have to deal with on a daily basis, right? And like our morals are don't steal when you go to Walmart. Like okay, I don't steal when I go to Walmart. I pay for my stuff, walk out, no biggie. But these lines of work put you in these moral jigsaw puzzles, if you will, and having to deal through it.
Very, very true. And if you think about, especially law enforcement, they get lied to for a living.
Mhm.
Almost everybody they come in contact with lies to them because they don't want to be put in jail. And so they are very, why is that guy so distrustful? Well, wow. For the last 20 years, he's been lied to almost every single day. I would not be very trustful myself.
Mhm.
And you're thrown into that situations. And I know probably as I don't know if part of your training as a chaplain there in New Jersey, but I remember my training as a police chaplain in Lincoln. Every year we would go to the state police academy and run through a few of their training scenarios and even sometimes in their shoot no shoot situations to understand what is it that our law enforcement those split second decisions that they have to make that the public then dissects in a Monday morning quarterback kind of way
Mhm.
and uh and we wonder why that life takes the toll that it does.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and of course, I've lived it, I was the combat guy, um, and the leader of combat guys out there running around and having to clear rooms and those split-second decisions of, target, no target, shoot or no shoot. Type thing. And so it's kind of like I've lived it, and I know many of my brethren that has as well. But then on top of it, we were watching a video yesterday of a police shooting, and it was this guy comes out and he's got a rifle in his hand, and he's about to put the rifle down. And his backup partner comes around the corner from behind the suspect and yells gun and shoots the guy as he's putting the rifle down.
Mm,
And then it's like, "Wait a minute, but did you see?" And in closer examination of the video, because you're looking at it from cop number 1, the face
from what?
on view, he's looking at it from behind. He doesn't notice that the other guy's pulling out a pistol
Mm,
out of the back, and his backup partner says gun because he's not talking about the rifle. He's talking about the pistol that got pulled out from his back
yeah,
and saying that while he's putting it down with one hand, he's pulling out the pistol to try and shoot his partner. And some of these issues, but and you can't, it's hard to see it from the camera footage that we saw. It's really, really, really hard. You had to actually frame it like in one frame, pause it, and zero in on that hand, and you can see the small silhouette of a pistol in there and go, wow. But most people didn't catch it. They're like, he was putting the gun down. He's putting the gun down. And we wonder why situations are going on, and stuff. And it's hard. It's hard. These guys have such a hard job.
they do.
And
And
it's
then our EMTs and firefighters and paramedics,
mhm,
they're out there trying to save lives, and if they're not able to do that, then they call their abilities into question.
mhm. Yeah, no, I've definitely seen that too, where it's, you know, they get upset because they can't save them.
Right.
You know.
I think about the corpsman, the first Marine that I lost in combat took a shot to the neck, and his corpsman sprinted 100 yards through machine gun fire
Mm,
and somehow kept him alive to get him on the chopper. When
that's
my
wild.
own our own battalion surgeon said, "I don't know how that kid kept him alive. I have no idea. I don't think I could have done that." And yet, even after that, that kid had suicide ideations because he felt like he didn't do enough.
Yeah, and that's tough because all of us sitting here nice and comfy, whether it's us on our chair or it's anybody watching this podcast right now, it's easy for us to automatically go, "Are you kidding me? You're a hero. Nobody would have ever done that."
Mhm.
And you've done something that, 99.9% of people could never do. How could you even think that? For us that have done things like that or whatever, we can identify the areas where we think I could have done something more. When in all reality, that's dude, now you're trying to make yourself Superman, kind of thing. And that's kind of the message. It's like, dude, you're not Superman. As
Very
much as in the military we're all told we are, you're Superman, you can do it all.
well,
You're amazing. You're Superman in camo, all this kind of
yeah,
stuff. But
61 now, trust me, I don't feel like Superman anymore.
no, the VA, disability is also telling me I'm not Superman anymore either.
Yeah, I just submitted all that. Matter of fact, today I start my, VA disability exams a little bit later this morning. I have to go for my, PTSD one because, I came out of that deployment with PTSD, but,
Mhm.
I refuse to acknowledge that for probably a decade.
It's a wild thing, and I'll tell you, I think I've noticed, I've been out of the military about actually, this will be 10 years this June, and I'm noticing certain things are PTSD symptomatic stuff, but it's built up over time later on. It's not always immediately after.
Yeah, which can happen with PTSD and moral injury.
Mhm.
Sometimes it can be decades later that as you reflect upon things, then those feelings come in. Those feelings of guilt and shame come in, or fear-based trauma, the same. That can happen as well as we get older and begin to reflect upon those events or those decisions.
And of course, like I think when we're heavily talking about military and police and fire and stuff, but this, of course, can happen to our civilians. This isn't a job based specific issue. And one area I personally think that this could be very applicable to a lot of people is, you're a survivor of suicide. Somebody in your family, somebody in your life has committed suicide and are beating yourself up for I could have done more.
Yes.
I could have done this or whatever. It's something you didn't do that you should have done or whatever the case may be, but I could see where that falls into the moral injury type area.
I have seen moral injury. I've seen it in the medical field,
Mhm.
especially from COVID. I was getting my in order to be a chaplain in a hospital, you have to have what's called clinical pastoral education. And every quarter equals a unit. So the Navy had a CPE school and on the East Coast and the West Coast, and I went to the West Coast CPE school, which is jointly run with the VA. And I went at the height of COVID, and I was the ICU chaplain at Naval Hospital, San Diego during the height of COVID when we were losing one or two patients a day to COVID. And I think I mentioned this to you in our phone call. I saw more death in that ICU than I saw in Afghanistan. The healthcare providers, the nurses, the doctors, the support staff, they were just crushing themselves because they just felt absolutely helpless to deal with what was going on. And I know in other hospitals, they were having to make the very hard decision. Well, if this person gets put on the ventilator, they have a better chance of survival. This person, we're just going to have to let them die. And those are very, very difficult decisions to make. And then they beat themselves up for for years afterwards in some cases. I've seen it in assault victims, whether especially if they were in domestic violence or in sexual assault, where during the abuse, the perpetrator is reinforcing saying, this is happening because of you. This is happening because of you, because of things you've done, how you dress, da 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 da, just really laying the blame on the person actually being assaulted. And then if that happens enough, or if it's a traumatic enough event, they believe that. And so they come out of that thinking this is something that I caused. And they have moral injury from that, in addition to the PTSD from the assault itself.
Yes, it's not even just what you did or didn't do. It's actually the messages that other people have given you about things and almost like somebody put it on you.
Yeah, exactly. And I've even seen it in the corporate world where somebody somebody in the corporate world, their boss tells them this report has to look like this. I know you're supposed to do an unbiased analysis of this situation, but we need it to say this so that we can make this profit or so that this thing can happen. And if you don't do this, you won't have a job. So
Mhm.
they have to choose with either being honest and ethical or feeding their family.
Yeah, man. How does moral injury really hit us? I think at the surface level, a lot of us can probably understand where moral injury hurts us spiritually, but what are some of the deeper implications of that? This really having like kind of an ongoing spiritual issue, or and even affecting our relationship with God.
Yeah. Well, it isolates us.
Hmm.
You know, moral injury isolates us because we withdraw from everything. We don't think that God can love us anymore. We don't think that God can forgive us because of what we've done. So we isolate ourselves from God. We'll isolate ourselves from the family because we're afraid that if we're with our family, we're going to corrupt them like we're corrupted. And we do the same thing with our friends. And we're afraid that if we tell our family and our friends just exactly what we did, then we will also be seen as the monster and will be completely rejected. So instead of just having minimal contact, we'll be, total isolation from rejection. So they hold all of that in, and it's just that they get very much tunnel vision of it's all about what I did, hiding it from everyone else, even God, because if it's out there, I become the monster, or
Hmm.
everybody sees me as the monster that I think I am. And so that or they might even with that spirituality, and this can happen in PTSD or moral injury, where God, how could you have allowed that situation to happen to me where I was
Yeah.
put into that situation? If that's the kind of God you are, I don't want to be any part of you. They will do that. So as scripture says, Satan's like a roaring lion seeking to devour you, and moral injury seeks to separate you from the pack so Satan can just eat you up.
It's another foothold the enemy wants to use.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Couple other fun things I noticed in this book is you don't let us go without homework in here. So one of the things when you start flipping, and of course going through the back here in the appendix is wait a minute, Appendix C says spiritual fitness scale for SOCOM test, and it's got a whole bunch of questions and multiple choice questions on here. A QR code. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, well, the book really is a result of my doctoral dissertation.
Hmm.
And, you and I were talking earlier. You had mentioned that you liked the fact it was just a little over 100 pages, not 300
Yeah,
pages.
yeah. A
Well,
little
if
little
you'd like
easier on the guys
300
that, you
pages,
know.
I'll send you the dissertation. And then that and strong coffee, and you might be able to get through it. But so as I submitted that dissertation, um, my number one encourager, my wife, but the editor of the dissertation, my dissertation committee was all like, this really needs to be a book. This needs to be something that we get out to the public. And so the dissertation is basically, or the book is basically my dissertation without all of that academic language. And that SOCOM test was actually developed by a friend of mine, Dr. David Alexander, who is also a Navy chaplain and has worked extensively in Navy medicine and also in the Special Forces community. And he and his team developed that test to gauge moral injury in those in our special forces because of everything that they encounter. And as he shared that with me, I thought, quite frankly, I think that's a good test for anyone to take as something, a pastor can take that. If someone comes in and the pastor suspects that that person may have moral injury, he could administer that test and see how the individual answers those questions, and can probably be able to gauge pretty quickly where that person is in aspects of moral injury. So that's why I included it in there, was so that anybody could do it. You may want to, take it yourself. I was talking with another podcaster, and she was saying she had never heard of moral injury before our discussion. And then as she looked at it, she said, this kind of explains my whole life. And because she knew she didn't fit quite with PTSD. But then when we went over moral injury, she was like, "This is me." And it
Mm.
helped her understand herself and really helped her turn a corner in addressing her own issues.
Yeah, I like some of the questions as I've been kind of going through here on this as well as just for our audience. A couple of these questions on here, like human value and respect should be the greatest social value. And I think that's heavily debatable in our society nowadays. So it's going to be interesting what some people put down. You know, it goes from strongly disagree all the way to strongly agree,
Mhm.
and the in between answers on there as well. And so I believe strongly in humanity and the power of people. Again, I can definitely see where situations have. You know, when you've seen so much, gone through so much, you hear of the loss of hope in humanity through what you go
Hey,
through.
I struggle with that myself sometimes.
Yeah.
Going back to Afghanistan, I remember seeing a child who had been held over a fire by the Taliban
Mm.
until his parents agreed to plant IEDs. And just what had been done to that child gave me nightmares for months. And I can still see that child in my mind's eye now and imagining what those poor parents went through.
Yeah. No, and it's tough even for us when just sitting here hearing about it. How do we turn around and have hope still?
Yeah.
How do we still turn around and realize that?
And that's why our hope has to come in Christ.
No, amen. I mean, that's the biggest part is I think the two biggest things for me is one, my hope rests more in Christ than myself or other humans.
Amen.
But the other part is if I have my hope in Christ, then I have my hope in his word.
Mhm.
And his word says that we're all made in the image of God. And that's what we do as chaplains is we believe that, we hold dear to that, and we see regardless of what you've done, what your beliefs are, where you whatever, you as a human being are still deserving of care and love. And that's what we do as chaplains. So regardless of where you sit as far as faith, no faith, different faith, we're here to do that. And but I think this book is really key in helping to do that, and I like at the end on here, it says, "So you got your 4 categories of either you're fit or you're stressed or you're depleted or you're just totally drained,"
Yeah.
basically, on
Yeah.
here.
That spirit continuum that we use in the Navy and the Marine Corps. What's interesting is, um, when you look at that scale, don't read it by columns, read it by lines, and then
Mm,
see where the majority of your answers fall.
yeah,
You know, and the colors that go along with that are green, yellow, orange, and red. Green being good, red being injured. And, we'll tell people if you go green to yellow, we do that all of the time.
mhm,
I'll say to my Marines, "Does the Marine Corps ever stress you?" Well, of course, everybody laughs at that point. And the Marine Corps stresses them on purpose because if everybody was always kept in the green, when you hit the battle space, you wouldn't know what to do if you didn't know how to handle your stress. But sometimes you can go farther and you can begin to crack, which is the orange, or you could really be injured, which is the red. And that's when you need that triad of care of the chaplain, the mental health provider, and the physical health provider.
I think you're starting to touch on something that I wanna get into is, like, a little bit of some practical takeaways for our audience, for the guys out there, because we've definitely dealt with or been a part of or even ourselves, I think, as also caregivers.
Mhm.
We have this mentality of I'm the one to help fix everyone else, so I can't look like I need help. And a lot of guys out there, typically we have this mentality of I'm the one to hold up everyone else. I can't look like I need to be held up at all. So what are some practical tips that you tell guys? I mean, other than number one practical tip, go get the book. This is number one. I would definitely say this is really going to help you. It's a great book. It's an easy read. And guys, I'm telling you, the other thing is he already told me that he's putting it in Audible. He's recording that right now, so you can also get it on Audible
In the near
later
future.
down the road. And so that'll help out. But beyond getting the book, what are some practical tips for us guys to kind of break away from that shell and really kind of help ourselves if we're feeling that we are facing some moral injury in our life?
Find a safe place to tell your story, whether that's your spouse, another veteran, a veterans group. Um, if you don't have a veterans group at your church, start one. Start a veterans Bible study. where you guys just meet bi-weekly for coffee and study. And I guarantee you the conversation is going to go to shared experiences. And in those shared experiences, you're going to be able to find a safe place to tell your story. We do a group here at the base. Bluntly, I ripped it off from the VA and tweaked it for active duty, but I did it with the VA's permission. And when we do this group, it's an 8-week course called Building Spiritual Strength, where we use the person's faith and spirituality to mitigate PTSD and moral injury. The first thing is the group sharing, having that safe place to share their stories in the group goes a long way with getting everything that they have held inside for so long, getting it out. And then once they do, they realize, I'm not going to be treated like the monster I think I am. And then they begin to believe less and less that they are a monster.
Mhm.
And then start another thing that we have them do, and they can do this right now, wherever they're at, is start keeping a two-way prayer journal. And this is what I mean by two-way. First of all, start writing out your prayers, or at least write out one prayer a day. And after you've written out that prayer, because mental health providers have told us for years and years and years, keep a journal. But this is specifically a prayer journal. So write out a prayer. And then after you finish the prayer, imagine how God would answer that prayer to you and write that down. Now, I'm not saying you become God. I'm saying just imagine how you think God would answer that prayer and write that down. And that also is going to help you see exactly, um, it's going to help you get out of your own bubble and look at your situation from God's perspective. And then that might help you be able to have God's eyes as you look at other situations going on around you. And even as you view your relationship with your spouse, with your family, you'll begin to get out of your own head about that. That's part of the homework we do for the group. And we'll meet back together, and I might say to the group members, what has God said to you in your prayer journals this week? And they will read snippets of their prayers and then read how they imagine God answered them. And then we'll give our responses as well. And it comes into very much of a collective of being able to get out of ourselves and be able to more and more be able to look at circumstances through God's eyes, and then being able to help find meaning for what they've gone through.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good stuff. The prayer journal really is. I've never heard of anybody that has actually done it ever say it was a bad idea. Seriously, I've done it myself. I'm probably not as good as far as an example of doing it every day, all the time for a very long time, but I've done it in like segments of my life where maybe I know that there's a major changing thing I need to go through, or something happens or whatever. And different seasons I've done that, and it helps. It helps. And then being able to write it out, and then you can revisit it later and when you're in a different mindset, and even see the themes of what has gone on
Mm-hmm.
in there. It's really good.
Very much.
We are going to have all of your links and everything in the description below, where you can get Larry's book here. So this is fantastic. Again, brand new on there, and it's already got #1 on Amazon on the cover. So
Yeah,
that's
we were
pretty awesome. Congratulations
very
again.
blessed. It went to #1 in Christian ministry, pastoral resources, and Christian counseling.
Yeah, that's phenomenal in 3 different categories on here. And so I'll be definitely recommending this quite a bit throughout, and I kind of doing some deep study on here myself. I'm looking forward to that, and I'd love to have you back on another time after I really fully go through this,
Okay, sounds good.
and yeah, and absolutely kind of give you a little bit more take on here, um, and see what else is going on in the life of Larry and his family as
Would
well.
love to do that.
So, but thank you guys and everybody. Thank you, Dr. Brant, for coming out with us and being able to really share so much wealth and knowledge with us on here. It's absolutely been an honor to have you on the show today. And so please give, of course, you would not be as successful as we've said already without your wife. And so please give her a big thank you as
Do
well.
she, it's even funny because she was a radio, TV, and advertising major in college. So she edits all my papers. She always makes me sound at least a letter grade smarter than I actually am.
Yeah, my wife as well. She's definitely the better one on editing and grammar and all of that
Well,
than
I
I
always
am.
say I married up, and everybody typically agrees, and I'm not offended by that at all.
No, that's what a good man does. But all right, thank you everyone for joining us here on the Valor and Vision podcast. Again, don't forget to check out the description to get all of the links to be able to check out Dr. Brant here. But don't forget to make sure to have valor, courage in the face of adversity so we can go after the vision that God has for us. Take care. God bless. See you next time.